This episode is brought to you by Excel Coaching Academy. Hey guys, I'm really excited to let you know that I started a mindset coaching business. So what I want to do with this business is I want to help entrepreneurs, business owners, salespeople, leaders, and fitness enthusiasts or athletes develop the right mindset to increase revenue, improve business or performance, and overcome the challenges needed to become the best version of themselves. You can get more information about this by emailing info@excelcoaching.academy. Yeah, I don't know, man. I was looking through your notes right there, and the therapeutic stuff, the therapy that you do.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get into that, but I don't know if you want to start there and maybe just kind of introduce who you are and say what you do, because
Sure.
I remember when we talked last on the initial call. I know there was sort of, I think, a lot of things that maybe you've done in the past, and I don't know if you're focusing on something else now. But I don't know. I'll let you kind of preface all that.
Yeah, I can talk about that. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah. So if you just want to introduce who you are and tell us what you do, and we'll go from there.
All right, great. Well, my name is Patrick Eilers. I'm a licensed professional counselor. Been a counselor for the last 9 years. I'm also transitioning. I just recently transitioned into professional life coaching through the American Association of Christian Counselors. So
Okay.
I've been doing that. Started the business in the end of 2024. So I'm officially starting with myself now. Working for myself starting in this year. So I've only been up and running, I guess, as a business for about 2-3 months. But for the last previous 4 years, I was I worked in sex addiction recovery for a practice in Novi, Michigan, which is in the suburbs of Detroit. And so we specialize in helping people overcome sexual addiction and using, if anyone's ever heard of Dr. Patrick Carnes' material, it's his program through an organization called ITAP. And so I did that the last 4 years. So I started that in September of 2020. Before that, I worked as a general practitioner in a couple of different practices. When I was a psychologist, I right at a school after I graduated in 2016. I worked up in Saginaw, Michigan, which is up kind of closer in the sort of mid-Michigan area. And worked up there for a couple of years, and I came back and switched my license to professional counselor, which in Michigan is really a little bit different education, but mostly just a title change. There's not too much different to it. So when I did that, I spent some time back at Moody. This is where I went for my grad work, and then went to this practice in Lapeer, Michigan for a while, which was a startup practice. It was a practice that was kind of brand new from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
They hired about 3 of us to work there, and so we kind of we're getting some things moving in a good direction there. And then during the pandemic, when the pandemic happened, there was a split within the company. And so they decided to split off into 2 different practices. And that didn't really go too well for them. So I had an opportunity to go to North Point. So I decided to do that and went over there and worked there for a while. And like I said, I've kind of had a bunch of different backgrounds, worked with a bunch of different ages, kids, teens, adults, men, women, relationships, couples, kind of worked with a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. So a lot of different experiences in a short period of time, but it's been really good. I've learned a lot, and working with the recovery program was really good too. Got a chance to work with some groups of men as well as individual people that were in the program. So got a chance to experience what it was like being a specialist. So a lot of different things I've done over the last 9 years.
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot going on. So so you said, I guess now you're sort of focusing on the sexual addiction. Is that what you're helping people with?
No, I'm getting more into what I'm calling mental health wellness, really designed more to help people work on 3 parts of themselves. It's really identifying who they are, not only of themselves, personally, physically, emotionally, those kind of areas, but also spiritually. And then also working with emotional intelligence in there, understanding themselves better, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and then being able to work on communicating that more effectively, and also just communication skills in general. So the focus is more on mental wellness. So really it comes out of an area where they call 8 dimensions of wellness, and it kind of looks at all of your life. From a therapeutic perspective, it's kind of what they call Gestalt therapy, which would be looking at kind of the pie of your life, lots of different areas of our lives. And if one of those areas gets out of place or is out of, misaligned, if you think about it that way, from who we really are, it's probably going to cause some type of distress for us. So really trying to help people, work on, rearranging that and, getting healthier in those areas of their life. Obviously sexual addiction, sexual sobriety, I guess I call it that. Sexual health is part of that pie. Absolutely. So not something I'm getting away from, so to speak, but certainly not working on it from a the only thing I'm doing, kind of focusing on that exclusively through specialization, which is what I was doing the last 4 years. When you work in the program, you pretty much exclusively work on that. Now, there's a lot of stuff that comes up in your life, and things that happen that you focus a lot on, but for the most part, the main goal is geared toward helping a person recover from sexual addiction or sexual compulsivity, however you want to kind of word it in that way.
Okay. So you mentioned this pie and sort of divided in these areas. Are those the pieces of that pie? Is that kind of a universal thing? Is it like the same areas for everybody, or does everybody have their own kind of contribution to the pie, or like what's going on there? I mean, is it?
Yeah, it's universal. So, there's an emotional component, there's a financial component, there's a physical health component, spiritual component. So you kind of look at everybody's life kind of the same. It's kind of the main, there's like 8 dimensions of it. So they're kind of main ones. I can't think of them all off the top of my head, but they're basically most people all experience some part of that in their life, so interpersonal relationships are part of that, how, whether we're getting good exercise, getting good sleep, overall emotional health, intellectual challenges, things that we're still continuing to grow in, financial health, spiritual life, those kind of things. So there are a lot of the ones that, across the board, people usually typically experience. So that's kind of the goal, is to try to help people find better balance in those places. And then as they find more balance, that helps to alleviate some of the distress that they go through. And the goal is that, there's a majority of people who don't seek services. So one of the things, the hope is one of the goals I to kind of see with it is if we can kind of help people have good mental wellness and they have good ways to find balance in their life without having, not that that's saying that they couldn't still work within therapy, but not everybody necessarily needs that type of work. They can, one life will sort of affect another life. And so it's kind of this domino effect, basically, that if we all sort of have better mental wellness, or even just wellness in general, that sort of helps our society as a whole. And so I think from a spiritual perspective, it's kind of that's how, as Christians, are we living out our faith? And that's part of that as well, being able to, affect the life of the whole of society in that way by continuing to live in a healthy place. So that's kind of the main, that's really where it was kind of born out of for me, as far as my thought of it. And, it's not completely formulated yet. I mean, I think I'm still working on figuring out how to totally put it all together, but, it's an ongoing process.
Well, I think, if you, for me, I'm a person who's a visual person, so I like the visualization of it. I think if you, if you have it laid out like this, there's a pie essentially, and there's these different areas of that pie, and there's different, factors and things that contribute to this thing as a whole. I like that. So I think there's definitely, it definitely makes sense to me that way. So with all the different factors of this thing, man, whether it's mental health, or I guess it sounds like you work a lot with addictions, or is it just
the last
addiction?
4 years I have specifically, but again, mostly it was, specifically sex addiction was the main one, because but you could factor that other addictions usually go, but their behaviors are in those spaces as well. But and then before that, certainly working as kind of a, working with everybody, any kind of diagnosis, anybody, I had multiple different types of, folks that I've worked with, nothing that was specific. So that's, when you specialize, like when you work with an addiction specifically, typically that's like, that's the one area that, you kind of focus on, learn how to help with that particular thing. Drug and alcohol addiction, at least in Michigan, I don't know if it's in other states, but certainly in Michigan, they have a special, it's not licensed, but it's like a certification that you can get to work with drug and alcohol addiction. Sex addiction is a little bit specific. It's, like I mentioned, ITAP is the organization, and they have a specific certification called the Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, so a CSAT. And those are folks that are specifically trained to work from that program with sex addiction. So not everybody has that. It's kind of a unique addition to your license.
So I've heard before, man, electrolytes, by the way, Element makes a great electrolyte packet.
They do. My wife uses those all the time.
Yeah. But you have to be a fan of the salty flavor, man. Because I tell you, this thing will, if you're not prepared for it, it'll catch you by surprise.
I've had a few of them. They are pretty powerful for sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious about this, because you hear a lot, like the opioid thing, which I think is a huge thing right now. I don't know about it in your area, but I know in parts of the Southeast is a big thing right now.
For sure.
I don't think people are aware that it alleviates emotional pain the same way that it does physical pain. And then, you hear a lot from people who have like some sort of alcohol addiction, there's usually the same thing, a mental pains, emotional. Um, and I know maybe you can't really narrow it down to a driving factor, but what do you think it is behind the sexual addiction stuff? Do you think it's the same thing? You think it's some sort of emotional wound or something? Or I mean, what do you think's driving that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's I think the biggest thing I see, or was seeing a lot of with folks. I mean, there's a couple different areas. I guess I'd say is that there's certainly some event that's happened in someone's life that has caused an emotional wound. I don't. This is a word that's being thrown around a lot in the society right now is trauma, and there usually is some kind of trauma. Sometimes it can be abuse, something like an abuse story in their life. There's been some type of sexual abuse that's happened to them. I would say that's not. I use the phrase it's not common, but I wouldn't say it's uncommon either. So I think there's certainly, or some type of what they call like an early exposure to sex, whether it be you run across pornography online, you see it in a physical form, in a magazine like they used to have, a sexual encounter of some kind with another person, whatever that is. There's certainly that aspect. So there's a wound and some kind of trauma there. It usually is part of it, but one of the bigger things I think, if we're looking at from a society, currently where things are at, seems like one of the other big ones is the two big areas emotionally people tend to sort of navigate, or at least the ones I usually heard of, were usually they're numbing out or trying to basically, you said, alleviate emotional distress. And so what pornography tends to do is it sort of tends to narrow a person's mind in. You tend to hyper focus on whatever that is for a while. So, let's say you have a high anxiety going on in your life and you have racing thoughts. You're not able to turn those sort of thoughts down or off, so to speak. Pornography allows you to sort of, focus in on just that for a short period of time. Orgasm, and then once you orgasm, then you have a sense of relief and sort of peace in that sense. It's that's how God designed it, but it's used it's used in an unhealthy way. Really, that's the way that it comes down to it. And so people get addicted to that because their body is used to doing the same thing over and over again. Our brain likes to do the same thing over and over again. God designed it that way. It's designed to be efficient. So what happens is the things that we, just like it says in the Bible, when we embrace things that are healthy for us, we get used to those same kind of things. That becomes our comfort. That becomes things that work for us. Same thing for unhealthy things. That's why it's really hard to break unhealthy habits typically, because we sort of have these little freeways in our brain. They're already mapped out. If we're not willing to do anything changing those freeways from existing, those freeways will just continue and they'll just continue to be used. When you're creating new ones is when you learn a new way of problem solving or a new way of handling some type of a problem or something in your life. You just you do something different. It creates a new freeway, but it doesn't necessarily immediately have an 8-lane road there. You have to kind of start from like a walking path to a biking trail to a 2-lane road and kind of keep building on it. And it takes about 90 days to really do that. It takes about 90 days to kind of rebuild the pathways. Now, those other pathways still remain. They still, they kind of just become dormant. They're not really being used. But I think when you're still using the new ones, you have to maintain that behavior. It's not something a lot of people want, especially with sex addiction, feel like, well, if I just stop, I'm good. That's one part of it. But there's the secondary part to that is, yes, stopping is good. But then where are you at in your mental health, with your mental life? Where are you at in handling your coping stresses that you have in your life? How are you navigating some of those other things that are going on? Because if you ignore those things, you'll probably go right back to pornography, because it is a powerful thing. Sex is a very powerful thing for human beings. Probably one of the most powerful things we can sort of tap into in that way.
So you mentioned this sort of focusing in on a thing, and I guess blocking the rest of the world out or whatever it is, and then having this release, and then I guess a sense of calm or whatever that follows. And that's interesting, because I've talked to people on the podcast who have had some sort of addiction, drugs or alcohol or whatever. And a big thing that people say that helped them get over that was finding like a bigger sense of purpose, like something to really sort of put that energy into. Mm-hmm. And so does this mean that if a person is in this spot, if they find something that, maybe takes that level of focus, that could be one of the, I'm sure many factors that they could achieve sobriety in or with? or through?
It's definitely one of the combats. Certainly
Hmm.
the idea that, finding purpose in your life, and going back to what you were asking me earlier, kind of the pie of your life, if you don't have purpose in your life, you don't have that vision of where you want to go, that's going to get filled up by something,
Hmm.
just what it is. God made us so that we have a focus and a goal of moving forward wherever we're going to be. And if we deviate from that, we're going to fill it with something else. And so a lot of times when we do have a lack of purpose, that's part of what can lead people into those behaviors over and over again, because there just isn't, what's getting me up every day? And what am I really focusing on going toward, moving toward? And one of the things I found that really seems to help people is being able to visualize that, so thinking about in your life, it's like you're going through a mountain range, and you're going to go up to the top of the mountain, you're going to have these vision moments in your life, right? So when you
Hmm.
get to the top of the mountain, you're going to be able to survey your life, so to speak, and see some different things, and see things you want to achieve, see things that you've accomplished. And you can ask yourself, what are those things? What are those things? Now, there's still more mountains ahead. You're still going to have valleys that are going to, be part of those things you're going to go through, you're going to learn. But the next mountaintop you want to get to, what's your vision of that? What does your life look like there? And it's more than just, a lot of times what people will say is, I want to be a better father. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better man. I don't want to cheat on my partner, those kind of things. And those are great goals to have, but they're very general. They got to
Hmm.
be super specific to you. It's kind of like you think about, NFL players, and I know this is something that's been done in sports psychology where, NFL players, hockey player, whoever, whatever sport you like, visualizing them playing out the play. So if you're an NFL wide receiver, visualizing catching that game winning, Super Bowl winning, whatever, conference winning championship ball. If you're the quarterback, visualizing the defense. If you're in the defensive side of it, visualizing the offense. So whatever that is, finding yourself in that spot where you can really see, this is what's going to happen. This is how I want it to play out. If you don't have that, then what's going to happen is it'll put cracks in that vision, and you won't be able to see it because you just overgeneralize it, right? Well, it'd be great to be a better person, right? Well, yeah, absolutely would be. Certainly that's a great goal to have. But if it's so general that it doesn't really move me, then I'm not going to really, there's not going to impact my life. I'm just
Yeah.
going to stay in the same space.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. I think probably the issue that comes up with that is, well, if you specify it, then it makes the parameters for failure real,
Yep.
because if you put that much specificity on it and you say, well, this is the exact person that I want to be, anything off of that might be failure or whatever. And I
Right.
think that's I think whether we are conscious of that or not, I think that's one of the things that keeps us, not even just from breaking an addiction, any goal, really, any goal
Absolutely.
or purpose. I think the lack of being specific sort of maybe consciously or unconsciously makes us feel better about the possible failure of not being that specific thing.
Yeah. And failure, I mean, we have to have failure to be able to succeed, and
Mm.
that's the thing. I think that unfortunately we've kind of gotten into a place in society where it seems like we try to minimize the failures and we try to maximize the successes. And sometimes there's been experiences in people's lives where they've had way more failure than they've ever had success. And again,
Mm.
how we define that probably really comes to person, but certainly the idea that there's the Thomas Edison quote, he found 999 ways or something like that to fail at
Yeah.
making the light bulb. You know, if we see that quote, we celebrate it now. But when he said that, he probably was saying it from a perspective of this sucks. I had to find
Yeah.
999 ways to fail. So do we see failure as an opportunity, or do we see it as as definition? I think that's where kind of the two places there.
Now,
Because if we don't look at it as an opportunity, we're probably going to look at it as this is just who I am, a definition again. Like I was saying.
would you, and I know you got to be careful with this, but would you use that same philosophy to someone who's trying to maintain sobriety? Because I've heard it two different ways. I've heard, if you stop drinking alcohol or whatever it is for you, if you count the days and then you have a
Yep.
relapse, then that's going to obviously be a huge thing. But then I've also heard, professionals or people who've been in this space say that the relapse is almost like it's part of the process.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, maybe we find a balance there or something, or obviously you don't want to relapse, but I'm saying,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't know what your philosophy is on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you're talking about, certainly when you're talking about looking at it from an addiction perspective, so from that
Mm-hmm.
context alone, there has to be there has to be an acceptance of relapse, but there can't be a celebration of relapse.
Right.
One of the things that I would say from a perspective of like 12-step, 12 steps awesome. 12 steps really good. Helped many, many people in many different areas of addiction. But one of the big complaints I've heard about 12-step is that there are people who come in and you think about unpacking their stuff that's going on. They're
Right.
almost celebrated for the fact that just because they're there, right? Not because they've actually changed anything, but because hey, relapsed 5 times this week, but I'm here, right? And so the celebration is that they're there, not that the celebration is that they've done anything different. Not saying that making that first step is easy or that the first step is shouldn't be celebrated. Absolutely should be. But if I've been there for 4 years and the only thing I've been able to do is go to a meeting and I'm not seeing actual change, then I'm probably not really improving there. I'm as close to being trying to stay status quo as I can be, because there's really and I personally have a hard time with this too, is the idea that, we never stay in the middle. We either getting worse or we're getting better. There's kind of really no ways you can look at the other way you can look at that. And I think from a perspective of relapse, when you're looking at, relapse will be something that's going to probably happen, especially with the sex addiction. You have to factor in the idea that, with drugs and alcohol, you can kind of remove the substance, you can remove yourself, you can get out of places where those are going to be. It's almost impossible to get away from. And I hear this all the time. People used to say, when I come in on the first sessions, they say, I can't escape all these things. You're right. You can't escape all those things. And I think first accepting the fact that you can't escape it. And then the secondary part with that to the idea of relapse is that, am I setting myself up for relapse or am I setting myself up for success? Regardless of whether or not a relapse is going to happen. Now, there's things as people go and they understand themselves better. What I've seen is that people are pretty good about knowing where their relapses are going to be or where their danger zones are. I'll say it that way. And so when you're in that danger zone, are you getting yourself out of it or are you continuing to put yourself in there? So I'll give you an example. Everybody takes their phone in the bathroom now. The phone has no reason to go in the bathroom whatsoever, none whatsoever. And I'm speaking to everybody, including myself, addiction or not addiction. The reality of it is the fact that you wouldn't take your cord phone in the bathroom, but we take the cell phone in the bathroom.
Right.
Now, one of the things I used to do very early on was I would tell people, okay, there's 2 places the phone doesn't go. It doesn't go in the bedroom, doesn't go in the bathroom. Eliminate those 2 places. You've just knocked, depending on the person, you potentially just knocked down 50% of what opportunity to act out could have been in. Because you move the phone away from where places it could have happened, opportunity could have presented itself. And so what ends up happening when you remove that, okay, so that becomes kind of your barrier. You have to know, okay, hey, am I going to step into that or am I not? If I'm not stepping into it, then great, then I've been successful and I'm going to continue down my sobriety path. I can look at the other areas where potentially acting out could happen and I still, work on eliminating those opportunities. But let's say that the person keeps taking their phone in the bathroom and they're just not addressing that particular boundary. Well, why is that? Because again, you may not act out when you go to the bathroom this time, but what happens the next time or the time after that or whatever. So some of it's opportunity, some of it's boundary respect, respecting your own boundaries, respecting somebody else's boundaries. So there's different things with that, but like that's just an example where if you eliminate the phone in one place, that changes a lot of opportunity. And so that can really be a major impact on people's, again, sobriety.
Yeah, it's crazy that you say that, man. I heard somebody say one time, I don't know who said this, but you talking about these opportunities and always kind of, I guess it depends on where, the context, what the addiction is, whatever, but you're always going to have some sort of opportunity somewhere. Somebody said one time that when it comes to addiction, no matter how far you drive, you're always the same distance from the ditch, and I thought that was I thought that was very insightful because it makes sense. But yeah, I appreciate you diving into that with me because I feel like, I don't know, man, I feel like if there were probably 2 addictions that I would say are not taken seriously, it's almost like people, if a person says this, it's almost like people just kind of laugh it off. It seems like the 2 addictions for that are sex and work. It's just like, if you bring up, which might be a real thing for somebody, you know what I mean? It might be a real thing, but it's like it's easy for us to just like dismiss that, like, oh, you're addicted to sex. Of course you are. Like, who's not? You know what I mean? It's just like but it's obviously a serious thing for some people.
Yeah, I think, and this goes back to both of those. I think part of it is, life functioning. Are you functioning optimally? And that goes back to where you just talk about the wellness, right? So you can enjoy sex and there's, as human beings we do, but there's kind of two ways. There's kind of getting into a whole bunch of stuff with that, but certainly the idea that, is what is healthy and what's unhealthy. So there's certainly an aspect of that. In the church, there's historically, we've not done a great job of defining that. So for people outside of that, sex has become something that is consumerism. It's a very consumeristic type thing that's spilled over into dating now. So dating is now very consumeristic based. Circle that back to the church again as well. So as a society, we've sort of turned sex into a consumerism. So of course, it's hard for people to look at that as a balance, because how do you have healthy or unhealthy when it's a consumeristic type approach? Now, work, right, I would say on the other side of that is similar, but I would also say that, work is, what's unhealthy versus healthy. One person might say, well, me working 60 hours is absolutely healthy for me. Well, the rest of their life is falling apart. Same kind of thing with sex. So I think there's a big part of that is there's not a lot of definition of what is healthy versus unhealthy. And on the other side of that, then as well, is what does, how do we consume it as a culture? And again, work, I think, is becoming more open to the idea that there are people who are workaholics, but trying to find that balance seems to be an issue across the board, right? And that's just seemed to be, part of it for human beings is being able to slow down, being able to take those reflections, being able to find that balance, which, again, a lot of that is that's something of the practice. It's not something that just comes naturally. And I do think that there's a lot of pieces where some of these behaviors feel much more organic for us to just do them rather than necessarily us to be intentional. Those are two words I've used a lot in the past, is that, things that are organic feel like they're very just like I can just naturally do them. So another example, and I'll use food as an example this time, is, it's a lot easier for me to go run over and pick up a Hershey bar and go, I'm going to eat the Hershey bar because it's just going to be a good thing for me to do. I like the way it tastes. I don't have to think a lot about it. But I have to think a whole lot about, if I'm going to eat healthy, what's my healthy meal going to be? I have to put a lot of effort into that and figure out what that's going to look like. And so that's where I think part of it too is, there's that bit of resistance from ourselves and our brains, and resistant to things that are very, like I said, I would use the word organic versus things that are intentional.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. I think, just I'm not a professional speaking on this, but just from the outside looking in, it's like, so if there's one thing that's like, I don't want to say glamorized, but I would say easily advertised online, social media, whatever, it's variations of sex. I mean, you have like, it's a known thing in the advertising industry that sex sells. Like, a attractive person sells hair care products or whatever it is. Like, you see a nice car, there's a beautiful woman next to it, whatever, like these things, this is a known thing. And then it's like on the work side of that, we're in this weird space right now where people are really pushing discipline, and which I'm all for that.
Right.
However, there's a balance, because, I've heard people say, like, these people are top performers in their company, like the top at their company. And I've heard them say, like, I'm not doing enough, I should be doing more. I'm like, bro, you look at what's going on. Like, well, look where you're at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a balance, and I think you worded it perfectly. Healthy and unhealthy for you. What does that mean for you? I think that's the best way to look at it. But man, if we were gonna filter out these, like, you get on Instagram and you see the motivational video with the Lamborghini or whatever, and it's like, man, I want that. I got to work harder. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you get to a certain point, man, you'd be filtering out you wouldn't even go anywhere, So
yeah, and I think that's the problem with social media. It's like there's a lot of beauty in social media, being able to connect with people, and there's some great things that are out there that people have utilized social media for, and then there's a lot of things that social media has driven us into an unhealthy space. And the constant, again, it's shortening our attention spans. You get on Instagram, that's why people scroll for so long, because they can just zone out. It's that, we talked about the kind of hyper focus. A lot of that seems to be a big part of it, is that is part of that, finding and navigating what that looks like for us. And, and I've said this in our podcast I've done before too, is that, we really haven't known the effect on the internet from the perspective of the human being from birth till death. What I mean by that is that we haven't really had somebody who's lived from all the way from birth till the time that they died with the internet. We have people who've been born into the internet age. We haven't had people who've gone through the entire cycle. So we don't really know what that looks like still. So even people who are on the older end of that, older millennials, so, early 40s and lower, we haven't cycled all the way through that either, because we were not born with the internet, in that sense. So I think there's a lot that's still unknown with that. And like you said,
Mhm.
there's so many things that people keep kind of bringing in, and discipline is a great word, and I think is definitely something that people need to bring in more into their life. But discipline becomes, do you get hyper focused on that? What you focus on, what you think about, is what you're probably going to navigate, healthy
Mhm.
or unhealthy. Certainly the idea, that talks about that in the Bible. Are we casting our eyes upon Jesus? Are we casting our eyes on the things that are not of this world? Are we focusing on the things that are, bigger than what we're, in this space here? And, it seems like the more and I see this all the time, we talked about relapse, and our reason people relapse is because they relapse in their mind long before they relapse ever physically. When what they're think about, what they're tempted about, what they sort of visualize or fantasize about. And that's where the escapism, you're never going to get away from seeing somebody at the grocery store. You're never going to get away from seeing
Right.
somebody at the post office. You're never going to get away from the virtual Zoom, work meeting. Those are just part of being, a person. You have to navigate relationships. And so a lot of times when people struggle with sex addiction, it's actually really internally in their mind. They're fantasizing long before they even ever act out. So what are you doing with your thought life? That's a big part of, again, maintaining sobriety. It's a big part of that.
Yeah, man, I think, I don't know. I guess the takeaway from that, talking about the social media stuff and the work and the sex and all that, I don't know how else to say it other than the balance, finding that healthy balance. And of course I guess that's a spectrum, for everybody. It's it's different for everybody. But yeah, you're right. We don't know, like we've never had a person live, 60, 70, 80 years under the effects of the internet. So we don't know. I mean, like,
Yep.
and even like, cause the internet's it's been like continually evolving, like I remember, I don't know when it was, I was born in 93. So I think the first, I don't know, maybe early 2000s was like the first computer we had or something like that. And it was
Yep.
the, the timeline might not be right, but whatever the first computer we had was like, it was the dial up, you get on it and,
Yep.
there might be a game or something. You might surf the web. You had like, I don't know, so many megabytes of like data for that month or whatever it was. But now you can go to TikTok or whatever and consume literally gigabytes of information, just like continuously swipe, swipe, swipe. And so
Yep.
it's just like, and now AI is coming, like AI is in the picture, and we don't know. So I think we definitely have to be careful with the effects of it. And I think the attention span thing, I think you hit the nail on the head with that, because, all these reels and stuff, I don't even think you can upload a reel that's longer than 90 seconds on Facebook and Instagram. I think TikTok lets you do
Yep.
3 minutes. So it's like, and you talk to any YouTube coach or like online marketer or whatever, they'll say like, oh man, those first 5 seconds, you got to hook them in the first 5 seconds, because if not, they're swiping. And it's like, dude, so yeah. So anyway, a lot going on there.
Well, and that's,
So
that goes back to symptomology, does everybody have ADHD, or are we just all have
right.
shorter attention spans because of something that we've created, which I think is much more likely than necessarily the fact that we all have not everybody has ADHD, but it's one of those things that becomes hyper focused because we're looking for diagnosis rather than looking at it from a perspective of just culturally how it's been changed. And like you said, being born in 93, I was born in 89. So I had the same kind of experience. Like we didn't get a computer till, we were later at to the game. Certainly, I think my parents might have bought one in 98 or 99, somewhere right around there, 2000. Yeah, and everything was dial up, and everything was, it was sort of a gentle sort of escape from
Yeah.
reality when you got a chance to play Roller Coaster Tycoon or do something like that, or it was like you said, dial up or whatnot. So, and how much that's changed. I mean, now it's just an expectation that kids 4 or 5 years old are going to have access to everything,
Yep.
and the naiveness of parents, and I say that respectfully, is that that kids don't know how to be able to access things that are inappropriate, and that's when we talk about early exposures. Kids are getting exposed 4 or 5, 6th grade. They're not 4 or 5, 6 years old, are getting exposed to pornography, and when that happens, it kicks off a curiosity, and for a lot of folks, that's really where their you want to call it addiction, or certainly their early exposure happens. It happens at a very early age.
Yeah, and that's definitely unfortunate. I'll ask you this, and then we'll move on from the addiction thing. So you mentioned a little bit earlier about how a lot of these addictions, they're fueled by this sort of desire to just zero in and sort of block out the world just for a little bit or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But then, like, we're talking about the social media thing, we're talking about this like excessive consumption of content, or whatever it is. it sounds like that perpetuates the addiction, because if you get on social media and you scroll, and there's all these different things going on, and you can't focus on something, you're looking for something to just focus on for a second. So it's almost like, is it that this continuous, excessive consumption, is that something that perpetuates these things?
I don't know that. I don't know by itself it does. I mean, I certainly can see where you're going with that. I certainly believe that I think you're onto something with that. I certainly there's probably some effect of it. Certainly some
Hmm.
people are much more susceptible to needing that sort of, perpetuation or feeding into it, or definitely have a hard time
Right.
breaking from their phone. What I would say that where social media usually enters the picture, at least in my experience, has been that social media has sexualized everything. I mean, it's certainly I'm going to give a pick on Instagram because it's the easiest one to pick on, but you go on there, you click on the magnifying glass, and there's stuff about I mean, it's anything. I mean, cars. You talk about hiking, you talk about gardening, you talk about cooking. It doesn't really matter what it is. You don't mention the 5-second hook, with reels. I mean, people use sexualization, sexual position, sexual clothing, sexual, you fill in the blank. They try to find ways to get people to find their content intriguing. And they don't even necessarily, and I think a lot of cases, a lot of the people who do that are not necessarily intending it to be sexual. Certainly the ones that like hiking and those kind of things, it's intended that you're looking at the mountain, but you're also looking at the woman wearing the yoga pants. So
Right.
like it's kind of one of those things where it's like it's a slippery slope because again, is that the influencer's fault, or is that the content consumption of the world? Is that the society?
Hmm.
There's probably a lot of people that share a little bit of blame in there, but certainly I don't think it's intended to be that way, but that's what it's become. And so there's certainly kind of going back to what you said, it's the mindset of, if I'm consuming that stuff all the time, and if I'm online all the time, I'm going to. I know Facebook's doing another thing. They have those short reels as well, and the same kind of thing. It's these short little clips of women doing dancing, or women, in certain types of clothing, or suggestive statements, those kind of things. And all that stuff fuels that same kind of thought. So you consume enough of that, eventually you're going to go watch porn, because that's where it's leading you to. It's entering in that that zone of where you're going to be set up for it.
So earlier you mentioned about working with relationships. Is this would you work with couples, or like a specific person in the relationship, or what happened there?
Yeah, so treatment with couples, typically, if you're talking about sex addiction, is usually goes a couple different ways. So a lot of times, commonly, a guy might come in and go, I got caught, or I've been experiencing this behavior for a long time and I haven't been able to stop it, and my wife doesn't want to, obviously my wife doesn't want this to be part of the relationship, and I need to work with you and work on that. What I've kind of seen, and this is my analogy, I think it fits. It might not fit for everyone understanding it, but basically the relationship is a fish tank. Essentially, it's got a bunch of living organisms in it. It's got live water, the fish, the plants, everything in there is alive. When you introduce some type of betrayal, whether it be discovery of pornography, whether it be affair, whatever it is, whatever that behavior is, if it's emotional, physical, whatever it is, it's like dropping a couple red drops of food coloring in the water. Now the fish tank has red water. Doesn't mean everything in the relationship is going to die. Doesn't mean the whole relationship's over, but it does mean that both parties have been affected. And so what ends up happening is, for a lot of people, a lot of partners look at it as, I'm not the one that betrayed the relationship. I'm not the one that ruined the relationship. I'm not the one who did this. He needs to work on his stuff, and I need to work, and I need to move forward. But at that point, when the waters turn red, there's unfortunately symptomologies that a partner starts to happen. This happens for men and women. This happens on both, regardless who's been the betrayer. It seems to happen on both sides. I've seen it both ways, where the partner develops, basically, for the lack of a better term, they basically start to develop a PTSD symptomology. Now, again, some people do not have diagnosable PTSD, but their symptoms start to look a lot like that. And we see a lot when you're talking about somebody who's been cheated on, right? They're hypervigilant. They look for all kinds of where the person's lying to them. They start to see other people as mistrust. They distrust our people when they start to see that. They start to have a belief that there's a continual lying going on. A lot of times, one of the things you'll see is that the guys will be doing great work. They'll be really making progress, and the partner will continue to accuse them. You're lying. You're not telling me the truth. You're still hiding these things, because they haven't really changed their behavior toward talking to them or being more open or more vulnerable, etc.
Right.
So what ends up happening when you have a relationship that's got a betrayal, one of the best things that I can recommend is not only working with a CSAT, meaning that the guy works with somebody who's a certified sex addiction therapist, but a partner works with somebody called an ABSAT, which is a specialist with partner betrayal trauma. And they actually work with the partner to develop an understanding of what they're dealing with. And then you work on the relationship after they both have an understanding of that. Some relationships need what they call a disclosure, a therapeutic disclosure, meaning that the couple comes in and they actually, whoever's been the one's been betrayed, who's the betrayer, will actually share all of the details in a therapeutic way of what has happened, and try to get to a basis of reality. Because a lot of times partners never know what reality is, even if they know some truth, they may not know all truth. And again, depending on how deep the addiction is in somebody's relationship, that those lies can be lies that go very, very deep. People who have multiple affairs, multiple one night stands, those kind of things. And so what happens, the partner doesn't have a clue about this for, could be for 20 years. Then all of a sudden all this stuff comes out. So when you're talking about relationships in that sense, it's very important that both parties do work with somebody who has a knowledge of that. Not that a regular therapist or kind of a non-specialist, if you don't think of it that way, doesn't have the ability to help, but they may not have the ability to understand the symptomology specifically. They may see it as, distress, anxiety, depression, whatever. They may not see it as, sort of partner betrayal in that sense. So there's a specific type of knowledge you have to have there. And I'm not a partner betrayal expert, but having worked with a lot of the guys that I worked with, we saw it quite often that the relationship was damaged from their behavior, whatever it might have been.
Yeah. So you particularly just work with relationships where there's a sexual addiction involved, not like, so, there's excessive arguments or whatever, they come to you as a counselor type thing. You work specifically just with those who have sexual addiction?
I have worked with couples that are non-betrayed, that have not been through something like that before. I worked as a specialist, but when I was working as a specialist, I didn't work with couples. I didn't work with couples who were going through that. I would work only exclusively with whoever the betrayer was. But before that, when I did work with couples. I worked with couples like you said, kind of regular, typical type of relational distress and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So what, because I was curious to get your thoughts on relationships, the intimate relationships, just kind of, I guess maybe in this context with the absence of the addiction stuff. So, I mean, what, I don't know if you can narrow it down to one problem, man, but if you could say the big problem that a lot of these relationships, again, with the absence of the addiction stuff, a lot of the relationships, I mean, what's going on there? Because I feel like this is such a, first of all, it's a touchy subject these days, but it's also, I mean, I feel like there's so many possibilities of what the problem could be. Although I feel like it still comes down to a few key, I guess, ingredients maybe. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it'd be hard for me to say it's just one thing or two things that are kind of going on societal wise. I mean, I think it goes back to a lot of stuff we kind of touched on, but there's kind of the big things I guess I'd see is it's really hard now. The two things I hear, and I was just on a panel a couple days ago, and there were a bunch of questions about, why do men and women, or why do men continue relationships with exes and those kind of things. And I do think that there is a contributor to that. So again, social media, and we picked a lot on social media today, but part of that is the fact that we have access to relationships that we've ended, unfortunately. And I think it's a healthy thing. And I know there are probably people who disagree with me on that, but I think it's a healthy thing too. When you break up, if you've made the decision that you are ending a relationship, dating, marriage, or otherwise, but certainly dating, if you've decided that you are ending the relationship, then you need to end the relationship. There needs to be a final cutoff of the relationship. That means that the relationship has no connection. There's no numbers. There are no social media connections. You delete them off everything. You block them for a certain period of time, and you have an opportunity to heal and grieve. I don't care if you were the one that initiated it, if you were the one that didn't initiate it. I think you have to go through a grief process. One of the things that seems to be really uncomfortable, or really, you touched on a touchy subject of, is that people don't grieve their relationships. They become very easily for them to kind of just go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And because as a society, we've kind of accepted that, it's more common for people to have step parents or step siblings or whatever. They just kind of continue to let those relationships continue to roll. So what happens is you can have, a family has multiple moms or multiple dads in the family, and everybody's sort of getting along. Now, co-parenting is a little different. So I'm not a parenting expert, so I don't want to go down that road too far, but that kind of thing is a different type of connection. But people who end relationships and move on to another one, they need to have a period of grief. There needs to be a period where you say, look, this relationship's done and I'm not going to move. I'm not going to continue it. I do think because there's a prevalence of physical activity with people, obviously people having sex, in different parts of the relationship earlier than they may have had in the past, there are deeper connections that are built. And again, there's a warning about that in the Bible about, being able to be connected to, the person that you've engaged with in a physical sense. So I think what happens is because there's not a grief period there, a lot of these relationships kind of continue to linger. And it could go years where you don't talk to somebody, but you still think about them. You still, again, back to what we talked about earlier, what's in your thought life? And so what happens is that those thoughts they continue to linger. Of course, it feels more comfortable when I'm struggling with something in my current relationship to go back to what I knew. I always think, that's just kind of human nature. We kind of glamorize the past, or, idealize things that didn't work out or whatever. And so then people start to wander. And when we start to wander, and again, pornography plays a role in this, is that, there's all this fantasy that exists in the world, whether or not it be on social media and it's like a twinge of fantasy, or if it's a complete fantasy in pornography. And again, when we have more fantasy, what happens in our mind? We start to fantasize about what could have been. And then we get caught in that trap of, these relationships continue to linger. I'm more likely to kind of reconnect again. Now that's probably as simplistic as I could make it as far as that one particular thing. But I think it goes beyond that. But I do think it starts to sort of, if we call it ground zero, is sort of in that space. What's going on in a person's mind? Are they fantasizing about that their former, person they were in a relationship with? And what does that look like for them? That's a big part of it. So I think it is, that starts to build off the foundation of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, not to keep, going back to social media, man, but I think that definitely plays a role in it. I think,
Absolutely.
I think you're talking about like the past relationships, but I think like the possibility of future potential relationships.
And I think that's the other side of it too. Yep, for sure.
Yeah. And it's like at a certain point before the internet, man, like there wasn't that, you had your person or maybe whatever it was. And you had a couple relationships before you got married or whatever the case was, but it's like you made it work with that person. And I don't feel that those people who made that work did not love that person. Like I think they truly did love the person they were with. Sure. I think the difference is like now we have all this endless, well, I think it's crazy, man. And sometimes I get not necessarily attacked, but criticized for this, but it's like women and men have different options, so to speak, on social media, because the average man does not have the options the average woman has on social media, because the average woman on social media is just like, you look at her inbox and it's just like all these potential people.
Yeah.
For men, it's a little bit different, but it is sort of still the same thing. But it's like that has to play a role in this fear of missing out, this fear of potential, this, all these other quote unquote options or whatever it is. And then, there's also too the part of it where, you social media is a highlight reel. So even if it's not a single person, it's a person who puts up a picture with their family and everything else. And it's like, they're only going to put the best parts on there. And then so you see their holiday pictures or whatever it was, their vacation, and you're like, oh man, they got it. They have a perfect relationship. They have it figured out. And it's like, no, dude, they're showing you the best of the best. You don't see what happens.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know, man, I'm under the philosophy of, if somebody's not a good fit, okay, they're not a good fit, just cut it off and move on with yourself. But I also too, I don't know that the perfect relationship exists with anybody. You know what I mean? No. I think it's going to take that work and communication and patience with that person.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, to touch on your point, one of the things that there's so if anyone's ever heard of John and Julie Gottman, but they've done all kinds of relational work, and they've done for years. They actually set up a love lab, and they did all kinds of research on relationships. But one of the things he says, there's a TED Talk out there if anyone's interested in checking that out. It's a TED Talk that John Gottman did. And he talks about this idea that I think exactly speaks to what you're saying, is that there's the word he uses is disillusionment. When people have disillusionment in their relationship, they have a much more higher rate of becoming lonely. That once their loneliness is there, their disillusionment kind of goes up. They get kind of resentful about their partner, and the likelihood of them, I think the way he words it is, you start to look for real or imagined alternatives, which speaks to exactly what you're saying. I think that there is I don't know if I'd call it fear of missing out, but certainly a fear of comparison. There's certainly a comparison thing going on social media. And so when we have that, how does that play into now our ideal of looking at our partner versus what we're seeing out there? and that escalates. I mean, I think there's certainly the ability, like you said, there's certainly the ability that men and women have different opportunities for that, for sure, and what that looks like. But certainly the idea that, when I'm disillusioned in a relationship, it's very easily, and I think anybody experiences this, even people who you said make it work. I mean, I think the reality is that you have to be committed to again, the good and the bad, no matter what that is.
Yep.
If you're committed to it. And that's where I think it gets, it's very easy for us versus, certainly or earlier generations to be able to find the things that make us disillusioned because we're kind of, I don't know if we're an expectation, but certainly the belief that, this isn't what somebody else is experiencing. So there's gotta be something wrong with me. And this goes back to kind of what we talked about at the very beginning, the identity piece, really, who am I? And well, I'm a human being, I'm flawed. We're all flawed. It's just a matter of, do we present the flaws or do we present like you said, the 1% of my life that went really well that holiday. And so, those are the things that I think when we get into that space, again, that goes back to what are we, what are we looking, are we focused on what's down here? Are we focused on what, where we're headed? And that's kind of I think the, big part of that is that, it's comparison is the comparison is the thief of joy, I think is the quote. And, we're not desiring or focusing on being contented. We're focused on, the sort of the highs, the extremes, I guess, in that sense, or the euphoria, or is the best word.
So one thing that fascinates me about this, man, I mean, this just fascinates me because like people talk about, you talk about like the Notebook. I don't know if the Notebook was based on a true story or not. I don't know, but it's like stories like that probably exist from several generations ago. And it's like, oh, that kind of love doesn't exist anymore. But I don't agree with that because if we have social media and we have all these quote unquote options and we still choose to be with our partner, make it work with our partner and continue to grow with our partner while having all these quote unquote potential opportunities or options, I think that means that the love is that much stronger. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you can think about how it was back before the internet and before social media and whatever it was that made them attracted to the person if they loved them or whatever. But it's like now with all these other avenues and you still are choosing your partner, So I just, to me, it's like it matters more. It's like I guess we love harder or more maybe these days. Well, I don't feel that it's we've lost that love that we once had is what I'm trying to say.
Right. And I would agree with that. The way I would look at it, I think you did a spectacular job putting that, if it is that is the choice. Right. And so that's where, the things about like, so the Notebook, for example, is, that's what you're saying is that, there was only one other option. I remember in the movie, right? And you think about even like Titanic's what I'm thinking of, like there's only one other option, right? It's the person you're supposed to be married, not the person that you really want to marry. The problem is the fact that there's the person we're married to or the person we're in a relationship with, and then there's all these other options, right? It's not just one other option. It's, hundreds in some cases, maybe thousands of other options, depending on where the person is. And so, of course, you're going to want to only see and pull those things out as the best things because that's what you're seeing. So you feel like, though, that's much closer to reality than not. And one of the things about reality is that your reality, for the most part, usually sucks in a lot of cases. It's not going to always be perfect in that way. And I think where, a lot of these things, the most movies, pornography, whatever it is, whatever's created is all fantasy based. And so we've just become so inundated with fantasy that we've confused those two between this is what reality and this is what fantasy is. And so where do we stay contented in reality versus, and again, in contented with reality means choosing my partner, which doesn't mean that that's going to be easy, but that's going to be, again, we go back to organic versus intentional. That's intentional. I'm choosing my partner and I'm continuing to choose my partner and I'm choosing to love her or him because I do, not because of the fact of whether or not, it's great in this very moment or because it feels easy. It's because but I think that's, like you said, that's where one of the things about love is that people, I think, feel like love should just be easy. Well, the initial part of that bonding part usually is because it's new and it's exciting. It's all those kind of things. And people want that feeling, but that feeling only continues to happen if you continue to have those moments of growth together. Like you mentioned, if you don't have those moments of growth together, you're never going to experience that newness. It's always going to feel like it's sort of on the backside of the mountain. It's because it's not continuing to go up, but that's where I think sometimes that gets really, tricky because that's something you have to continue to cultivate in the relationship together.
Yeah, I think you made a good point with that fantasy thing, man, because we have the movies and the fairy tales and all this kind of stuff, and those things are obviously appealing to people for obvious reasons.
Right.
But then you have what seems to be the real life fantasy, because again, if somebody puts basically a highlight reel of their life on social media, that is a fantasy. I mean, it might happen at a very, very small portion of their entire life, but it's like you're comparing yourself to a person's life that really, for the most part, is not even real. I mean, it's a
Right.
very small portion of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's a fascinating point. You before we close out of this thing, I want to ask you, because you've brought this up a couple times, about it sounds like you're very religious, and so I want to ask you about this. Like with the people that you work with and maybe your personal life, how important do you think that is, that sense of a connection to God, so to speak? And I see it as God. Some other people might see it as the divine, the universe, whatever it is.
Sure.
Connection to that higher being, which in my personal opinion is a being that created the universe.
Yeah.
But what's your thoughts on that? The importance of that connection.
I mean, I think it grounds you. I mean, that's, at least in my experience, that's, for me, how do I understand the world when it comes to the, and yeah, it's a bias because it's what I believe in, is that of course that, like you said, that God created us. And so we have that, sort of foundation in the faith. I think for the other, or this is something you mentioned before, is that, it's sort of that, where do we become, it's easier for us to sort of sway away into just being kind of carried away to different things, where it be fantasy, where it be, all the things we've talked about today. And for me anyway, my faith, it helps me to be able to be grounded in the fact that this is what is, the reality of what I believe is to be true. And I do think for couples, I think it's really important to have that anchor. I know me and my wife share that anchor. Now, one of the differences I think in our relationship is that just sometimes the way, not necessarily the way it's executed, but certainly the way I think that, the way we may have just our different perspectives growing up have made us, has taught us a little bit different about how to see the world. I think that's a big part of it, but still, we still have that foundation together. But I do think from a perspective of working with couples that I've worked with, I mean, if you're not in alignment with your partner, you don't have to be in lockstep with your partner, but certainly if you're not in alignment with your partner, like going toward the same, if you're not on the same road, going to the same destination, so to speak, there's going to be a lot of struggles with that, because love, you talked about, love is a choice that you have and you continue to make. But I do think that if you don't feel like your partner is equally trying to work with you on that, or trying to help you get to that goal, or trying to work together on that goal together that you've mutually made, it gets very difficult to feel like you're, wanting to turn back into the relationship. I always think about, when you get married, you have two lives that come together like this. And then throughout our life, we go like this. We keep kind of turning in and out as long as we're in the relationship. But some people, they just, all it takes is just a little bit of an angle to go like this, and 20 years goes by and they're completely far apart. They don't even know who the other person is, because they haven't continued to turn back into the relationship. So I think it's important. I think the foundation of that line, you continue to come back together, can be faith. Sometimes it's parenting, sometimes it's other things in life that you may have that you're drawn to. But that's where I think I would say the anchor of faith is sort of that line that you're continuing to turn back into, because you still have that foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I don't know, man. So somebody asked me about prayer one time, and I was like, what he asked me, what were some resources that I felt like had benefited me. And I think he was expecting me to say, some books, a podcast, or something like that. And I mentioned prayer and he kind of narrowed down on it with me. He was like, well, why do you say that? And I said, because it's like we have this opportunity to connect with the not the person, the being that created all this that we see. And I don't know of anything that's more empowering than that, and it's just that connection. I guess if our partner is aligned somewhere in the same space of that, because I hear, especially in the Christianity space, I think some families still do this. They pray together. They do they do the prayer thing together. And I don't know. It's just fascinating to me, because like you can go into a church. So the churches I've always been in have been some variation of Baptist. I've been into Church of God churches, and some other variations. But it's like when you're in a place and it's like there's a prayer, whether that's silent or an audible prayer that somebody's saying out loud. It's like it's crazy the connection that you feel to that. You know,
Yep.
I'm not really the kind of person to pray in public. That's something I keep private. But it's just it's a very empowering experience. I feel like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it empowers think about empowering the relationship, because you know that you're there kind of in alignment with one another, turning into that. And certainly, in this case, if understanding that that's how God designed it in that sense, based on, the Christian faith, that's what the the relationship is to reflect, what the relationship that God has with us, as human beings. So that the marriage relationship is a little bit similar to what the marriage between the church and Christ is. And so there's a lot of that's mirrored in a relationship within marriage. So there's certainly that's I think is really important, and that brings that communion, so to speak, between two partners, is just like it does between the church and Christ.
Yeah, for sure. So where can you be found? Do you have social media, website, or anything?
Yep. So I don't have a direct website, but I am on Patreon. So patreon.com/bloomworks is the business. The name of the business is Bloomworks Concepts and Coaching. So you can find us on Google. We have a business page there. Like I said, the Patreon channel. We do have a YouTube channel, Bloomworks Concepts and Coaching. That's the name of it. You can also find me on LinkedIn, MA Patrick Eilers, MALPC. You can look at Bloomworks as well. You'll find me on there. We're hoping to have a website soon. That should be up and running here in a month or two. But the email to reach me for the business is bloomworkscc@gmx.com. And I can provide you those if you'd like. But those are some ways you can get a hold of me.
Perfect. Is there anything that we didn't get into that you wanted to get into? I know we kept a lot of the, we talked about the addiction, the intimate relationships, and then the spiritual connection. I just didn't know if there was any other thing you wanted to get into.
No, I think you covered everything really well. I really appreciate your time. I think these are these podcasts, or these style of podcasts I always really enjoy. I think these are, we got to talk about a lot of different areas. We got to talk about a lot of different things, different ways to consider things that are going on in our society and stuff. So I really enjoyed that, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you and share with everybody about kind of just some different thoughts we had together. So.
Yeah, man. So one last thing that I normally ask everybody before we close, if you could share one of the most important lessons you've ever learned, it could be through your career, something in your personal life, if it's something you're comfortable sharing. What do you think would be one of the most important lessons you've ever learned?
Yeah, it's to just say that off the top of my head, that's gonna be tough to just think of. There's probably a lot of different ones I could think about, but the first word that came to my mind when you said that was perseverance. Throughout my time, throughout my career, I mean, not necessarily career wise, but I mean, like, even in my school career, I consider that, when I started this journey, I started right out of high school. I decided that I felt called to be a therapist, and so, or at least help change people's lives. So I had the opportunity to, go get my master's, which was a lot of perseverance just to do all those. It was 8 years of school was all said and done, but and then just the perseverance I've had in my career. I mean, there's never really been a point where I felt settled. Even the last 4 years, I mean, there's been a lot of success I've had, but I never knew if that was where I was going to be for the long term. I was still trying to investigate if that was really was right for me to stay in the recovery process. So starting this business has been an ongoing. I was just sharing. I have a part of a therapist support group that we were sharing today. I said, I'm not in a good space today with my business because it's just that there's certain days. Some days you feel really empowered. You're like, oh, this is great. It's awesome. It's going to go in a good direction. And there's our days where you're like, no, this is a terrible decision. I shouldn't have made this. But that's where the perseverance and the ongoing sort of faith that you have to have is that, there's a reason and a bigger purpose to what this was. And that the vision that I had, many years ago, but certainly the vision I've had more recently will come into fruition. It's just, it's not in my time. So just continuing to move forward and knowing that, that there's purpose to what we do, there's purpose to our lives, there's purpose to what we have been asked to do, called to do, as a general, sort of population, general, in the church sense, general calling for the church, but also specific as well. So I do think that's a big important lesson I've learned, is that nothing is happens for any or I guess everything happens for a reason is probably a better way of putting it. But nothing is wasted, and so can we maximize the time that we have when we're here, and continuing to persevere even if it doesn't look like we have an immediate answer in front of us. So I think those are some big things I've taken away.
Yeah, fascinating question or answer, man. It's crazy that you say that, because I was just on a podcast as a guest a little bit before this, and he asked me what did I think was one of the most important traits for entrepreneurs, and my answer was discipline, but it was sort of in the same direction as yours about how a lot of times if you're on this path, not even a lot of times it's going to be not enjoyable. You're not going to want to make the calls or make the emails or sit down and do the work or whatever it is. And I think that's another thing, talk about social media just once again, that has sort of glamorized entrepreneurship. You get on and you see the successful business and all that, but you don't see the decade or whatever it is behind that,
Right.
And I think that's an important message that you shared just now, is that I would say spirit of perseverance, because it's a very deep thing in a person to persevere and be resilient like that.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes for any purpose that we're pursuing that's much higher than us. So,
Well, I think resilience is another great word too, and I would also, go back to what we were talking about earlier. That casting that vision has to be something that we specifically think see we can do, and I think that if we don't have that, like you said, you're never going to want to be resilient or be able to be persevering, because you always, there's always reasons for you not to continue. There'll always be a reason for that, no matter what. It's a matter of finding the things that, based on the idea that what are the reasons. If there's a lot of reasons to stop, what are the reasons for me to continue? And those may not be as numerous. But those are usually a little more impactful.
Yeah. But it's also too, though, if the purpose is bigger than you, and how you feel in the moment does not matter if the purpose is bigger than you.
That's
it's
true.
like if you go to a room with 1,000 people in it, and you're too cold, but the other 999 people are comfortable, like, well, that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So it's like that's one thing that's at least helped me, man, is like look at it as something that's whatever this thing is I'm trying to do is much bigger than me. And so if I feel uncomfortable or, afraid or nervous or whatever it is in the moment about the thing I'm trying to do, it's like, well, that just reminding yourself of that bigger purpose. Like, okay, well, how I feel right now, probably not going to feel that way forever about this thing, but get through this, get through it, because the purpose is much bigger.
Absolutely.
But man, listen, it's been a great conversation. It's glad to get you on here and get some of your insights and your thoughts on some of this stuff. Let me do this. I'm going to stop the video just really quickly, and I'll explain to you the upload situation and the process and all that good stuff. But yeah, man, definitely appreciate your time here.
Yeah, Cody, appreciate it. It was a really good conversation. I'm glad I was able to have with you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Hey guys, I really appreciate everybody tuning in today. If you found this content or this episode useful and intriguing, you can visit us on social media. This is Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple and Google Podcasts. Pure Wisdom Podcast on all social medias. You can interact with us, follow, like, and share there, and we will see you guys next time.